Why did the engine always die when she was closest to home? The van rattled down a sun-bleached road that cut through North Carolina like an old scar, rough, stubborn, alive with memory. Pine shadows swept across the windshield, the light flickering over her face like passing ghosts. Helen Monroe's hands gripped the wheel tight, knuckles pale against the cracked leather. She hadn't slept much in days, but her eyes stayed clear, eyes that had seen too much, lost too much, and learned never to blink first. On the dashboard, a faded photo leaned against an old brass compass. Two women, faces streaked with dust and laughter. One of them was Helen, years younger, eyes bright under a combat helmet. The other, Rachel Dawson, smiled like she could outrun death. Helen glanced at the picture, her throat tightening. "Told you I'd take you all the way," she whispered. Half a joke, half a promise she'd been keeping for miles. The van groaned up a shallow incline, engine coughing in protest. She coaxed it with a steady hand, the way she used to calm a helicopter under fire. "Come on, girl," she murmured. "Not yet." But the engine sputtered again, then died with a heavy sigh. Silence filled the road, broken only by the faint hum of distant aircraft from camp, 2 miles ahead. Helen coasted to the shoulder, gravel crunching under the tires until the van rolled to a stop by a chain-link fence. Beyond it, pine trees swayed in unison, and somewhere deeper in the base, she could hear the rhythm of boots, a sound she'd once known by heart. She sat for a moment, staring out at the horizon. Then she exhaled. "Guess we're stopping here, Rage." The nickname came out soft, what she used to call Rachel in the field. Heat pressed down as she stepped out, boots striking gravel, the smell of jet fuel in the air. She popped the hood, steam curling upward in lazy spirals. The metal burned her fingers, but she didn't flinch. She'd been burned before in ways no scar could show. From the back of the van, she pulled a small canvas bag and a rag that had seen more dust than soap. Her movements were methodical, patient. A ritual. Fixing engines had always been easier than fixing memories. Her shirt clung damp to her skin as she leaned under the hood. Grease smeared across her arms. Sweat beaded at her temple. And beneath her shoulder strap, partly hidden from view, a tattoo glimmered faintly, a black stallion inside a silver shield. Its edges looked as though they'd been cut by fire. Ghost Company 7. A name erased from the books, buried under red tape and silence. But some things don't die just because the world stops saying them. The wrench slipped once, clanging against metal. "Damn," she hissed, shaking her hand, then adjusting her grip. She kept talking softly to the van, the way soldiers talk to weapons, machines, or memories. It wasn't really the van she was trying to calm. That's when she heard it, tires grinding against gravel behind her. A Humvee stopped a few yards away, the rumble too heavy to ignore. She didn't turn. Not yet. The door slammed, boots hit the ground, and a sharp young voice called out, "Ma'am, this is restricted property." Helen didn't move. She tightened one last bolt before sliding out from under the van, wiping her hands on her jeans. "Didn't park," she said flatly. "Broke down." 3 soldiers stood near the fence line, looking at her like she'd walked into a secret they weren't supposed to explain. They couldn't have been older than 22. The one with a clipboard stepped forward, all regulation and nerves. "You'll have to move it off the property, ma'am. Base security can tow it." Helen raised an eyebrow. "She won't make it far." "That's not our problem," another said, the tall one with aviator shades too big for his face. "You can't stay here." Helen studied them quietly. No anger, no challenge, just recognition. They were kids in uniform, eager, obedient, full of the kind of certainty the battlefield burns out of you. She once been them. "I'll be gone in 15, she said. "Not how this works," Clipboard shot back. "You need to clear out now." She gave a slow nod, bent again toward the van, not to defy them, but because the engine deserved more attention than arrogance ever did. The soldiers exchanged glances, irritation building. One of them muttered something about calling it in. Then before they could move, another engine approached, heavier, lower, deliberate. The kind that doesn't rush because it doesn't have to. The soldiers straightened instinctively as a black SUV rolled to a stop. The door opened, and a man stepped out, his uniform immaculate, silver stars catching the sun. 4 stars. General Hayward. The clipboard soldier snapped to attention, shouting, "Sir, perimeter breach. Civilian." But Hayward didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on Helen, specifically on the exposed edge of the tattoo under her shoulder strap. The silver shield caught the afternoon light, and for an instant the world went still. The general's face changed, not in anger but in recognition. His breath caught. And then, to the astonishment of everyone there, he saluted. Not casually, not politely. A full, formal salute, sharp as a blade, drawn from memory and respect. The young soldiers froze. Their confusion was almost painful. Who saluted a woman fixing a van by the fence? Helen stood slowly, wiping her palms on her jeans. Her gaze met the general's. Time seemed to thin between them. "You recognize it," she said quietly. He nodded once. "Province, Firebase Kestrel, you pulled 2 of my men from the rubble." Her jaw clenched. The name of that place still carried the weight of smoke and screams. She hadn't expected to hear it again. "You were there." "Half buried," he said, "until you were." Neither smiled. Some truths didn't need words, only acknowledgement. Behind them the soldiers shifted uncertainly. Hayward turned, his tone steel calm. "She is not to be bothered," he ordered. "She is to be assisted." Clipboard stammered, "Sir, but—" "Assisted," Hayward repeated, each syllable like a command that could move walls. The young men stiffened. "Yes, sir." Hayward walked closer, the gravel crunching beneath his boots. "Helen Monroe," he said, "Ghost Company 7. Her expression didn't change, but in her chest something tightened. She hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in 15 years. "We liked it that way," she said finally. For a moment neither spoke. The wind moved between them, carrying the smell of pine and jet fuel and the faint sound of marching drills in the distance. The van's hood still hung open, steam fatting into the evening. But for Helen, something inside had already eased, like a weight she'd carried alone had just been recognized. Hayward's voice dropped lower. "I thought your unit was a myth." "Maybe it was supposed to be," she said. "Myth's the only thing that keeps ghosts quiet." The general's eyes softened. "Not all ghosts want quiet." She looked away toward the photo on her dash, the smile frozen in time. Rachel, still waiting for her road trip. The general followed her gaze, then nodded once, not in question but in understanding. "If you need a hand," he said, "you'll have it." Helen didn't answer right away. She just reached into the van, turning the wrench one last time. The engine coughed once, then roared to life. Her lips twitched, the closest thing she'd had to a smile in days. "Guess she just needed the right audience," she said softly. Hayward chuckled under his breath, a sound rare enough that the young soldiers exchanged bewildered glances. He took a slow step back and saluted again, quieter this time. Respect, not ceremony. Helen met his eyes, then returned the nod, small, deliberate, final. As she closed the hood, the sky behind the pines deepened into amber. The base loomed ahead, gates gleaming in the fading light. For the first time in years, the road forward didn't look like an obstacle. It looked like an invitation. She wiped her hands on the rag, slid back into the driver's seat and looked once more at Rachel's photo. "Picked the right road today," she murmured. The engine hummed beneath her fingertips, warm and steady. Outside, the soldiers watched in silence as the van pulled forward, dust rising in its wake. None of them spoke until the sound faded into the horizon. The general's gaze lingered. His voice was low, meant only for himself. "Ghost Company 7, he said, "not a myth after all." And somewhere beyond the trees, in the still air of late afternoon, it felt as though something unseen, or someone, was finally at ease. The room smelled faintly of machine oil and history. Rows of folding chairs faced a podium scratched by years of use. Ceiling fans groaned overhead, moving the heavy Carolina air in slow, lazy circles. Soldiers filled the seats, some fresh out of training, others long enough in to wear the weariness behind their eyes. No one spoke above a whisper. They'd all been told to show up, but not told why. General Hayward stood at the front, his hands braced on the podium, expression unreadable. When the last seat filled, he said simply, "This isn't a drill." A ripple of unease moved through the room. Hayward paused, eyes scanning the rows. Today isn't about checklists or protocol. It's about something that never makes it into the manuals. He stepped aside and looked toward the back of the hall. Helen Monroe stood near the doorway, arms crossed, cap pulled low. She looked like a mechanic who'd wandered in by mistake, grease still on her knuckles, hair streaked with dust, fatigue written in every line of her face. Yet when Hayward gestured toward her, the air shifted, as if every molecule decided to stand at attention. "She won't say it herself," Hayward told them. "But this woman carried men out of fire when all else was lost. Listen to her, then remember." He stepped back, leaving the microphone waiting. Helen didn't hurry. Her boots tapped lightly across the floor, each step echoing louder than it should. She stopped beside the podium but didn't step behind it. She never liked barriers. Her voice, when it came, was low but steady. "I'm not here for applause," she said. "Just one story. Then I'll leave you to decide what it means." She reached up, tugged her strap aside, and revealed the ink on her shoulder, a black stallion inside a silver shield. The mark of Ghost Company 7. The room seemed to inhale as one. Some of them had heard the whispers, the campfire legends of an erased unit. Now the myth stood in front of them, breathing. "We were 7, she said. "Dropped into Province 2007. No air cover, no backup, just orders." Her words were clipped, surgical. No extra motion, no dramatics. "The first hour we lost. Pressure plate took the ridge. Shrapnel hit my leg. Rachel patched me on the move." Her throat flexed once, then steadied. "By nightfall, we hit the valley floor. Then the flare went up." She paused. The silence that followed felt alive. "It wasn't hours," she said finally. "Seconds later, 30 rifles opened at once. Sounded like thunder trying to tear the sky apart. No one moved. Even the fans seemed to slow. In that valley, a medevac bird was down. 29 still alive, pinned on 3 sides. No one else was coming, so we moved." Her hands tightened into fists. Suppressive fire, crawl through dust, move an inch at a time. Rachel took point, always forward. Her voice caught just briefly. She held the flank while I dragged a pilot uphill. Her voice on comms, "Don't think, just crawl." The young soldiers in the front row leaned forward unconsciously, seeing it through her words. The heat, the smoke, the way courage sometimes sounds like anger. We reached the last line, 1 seat left. Her eyes dropped for a second, then lifted again. I shoved the wounded in, told her to clip in behind me. She shook her head, said, "You owe me a road trip, Helen, don't waste it." The next pause was long enough for everyone to feel the space where Rachel should have been. "She stayed," Helen said softly, "held them back long enough for the rope to lift. Lantern burned 40 seconds more. Then the ridge went quiet. No one dared move. A few swallowed hard. Others just stared, seeing not a legend but a woman trying to hold a fracture together in front of them." Helen let the silence stretch. "She gave me the rest of my life," she said at last, "so I'm driving it mile by mile for her." She stepped back from the mic, but the story didn't leave the room. It clung to the walls, to the dust motes drifting through the fan blades, to the air itself. A young private in the front row found his voice first. "Ma'am, why don't we know this?" The question came out small, almost apologetic. Helen looked at him, and the steel in her eyes softened just enough. "Because missions get sealed. Because the world moves on. Because people like Rachel get buried without medals." Another soldier asked, quieter, "Why didn't you ask for recognition?" Her answer came fast, like muscle memory. Because we didn't do it for recognition. We did it for the person beside us. The words landed heavy, too honest to cheer for, too true to ignore. A sergeant near the wall lowered his head, fists clenching at his sides. The room held its breath. Hayward moved back to the front, his expression unreadable. "I heard her voice that night," he said quietly. "Didn't know her name until now." Helen nodded once. She would liked being remembered. Hayward turned toward the room. His voice carried the weight of command again, but softer now, personal. "What you heard today won't be written in doctrine, but it's truth, and now it's yours to carry." No one clapped. No one moved. They just sat there absorbing it, the kind of silence that outlasts speeches. Helen stepped away from the podium, the echo of her boots following her out the door. Behind her, the hall stayed still, the story settling like dust after a storm. The corridor outside was narrow and humming with fluorescent light. She walked beside Hayward, neither in a rush to speak. The quiet stretched long enough that it began to feel like peace. Finally, Hayward said, "What happened at the fence shouldn't have happened. You deserved better." His tone was sharp, almost scolding himself. "Kids doing their job," she said, "but jobs can be taught." He stopped walking, turned to face her. "Then we'll teach them from today. If a veteran breaks down near our lines, we help first, ask later." A staff officer nearby scribbled the order down before Hayward even finished. The general's gaze didn't leave Helen. "That's on me." She gave him a single nod. "That's enough." Accountability. It meant more than medals ever had. They kept walking until the scent of oil and hot steel thickened the motor pool. Mechanics moved between vehicles, sleeves rolled, voices low. One older sergeant waited by her van, wiping grease from his hands. Without a word, he lifted the hood. New belts, fresh clamps, tight hoses. The machine purred when he turned the key. Helen leaned against the fender, arms crossed, watching him finish. For once, she didn't need to coax the engine awake. It hummed, eager to move on. Hayward reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn box. He opened it with deliberate care. Inside lay a silver coin, its edges smoothed by time. The front read for honor, for silence. Helen turned it over. On the back, "Carry it forward." Her thumb brushed the edge, tiny initials carved along the rim. R.D. Rachel Dawson. The breath she drew came slow and uneven. Hayward placed the coin in her palm. "This isn't given lightly," he said. "It's for those who carried more than orders, and for the ones still carrying them now." Helen closed her fist around it. "It's not for me," she said. "It's for her." No one had to ask who her was. The sergeant by the van handed her an envelope, the corners creased, names scrawled in thick pen. "Something from all of us," he muttered. She opened it carefully. Inside was a folded map marked in red ink, a route across back roads, small towns, circled points, fuel stops, memorials, forgotten museums, and one destination written larger than the rest, Veterans Overlook, Knoxville. Beneath it, a date and time, tomorrow, 1700 hours. Helen flattened the map against the hood, tracing each circle. "You boys always were better at logistics," she murmured. The mechanic cracked a faint grin. "We just want you to keep going." She folded the map, slipped it into the envelope, then into her jacket. The coin stayed in her other hand, its warmth seeping into her skin. Hayward gestured toward the open hangar doors. Outside, sunlight stretched across the concrete, gold and blinding. The base gate stood open in the distance. As Helen walked toward them, the younger soldiers along the way straightened unconsciously. They didn't know the details, but they knew enough. Respect needed no explanation. At the gate, one sentry raised 2 fingers to his temple, then touched them to his chest, a silent gesture, small but deliberate. Helen paused. Her hand rose, mirrored the motion, 2 fingers, temple, heart. The guard lowered his gaze. Some traditions weren't written, they were remembered in gestures like that. Hayward watched but didn't interrupt. Helen climbed into the van, the coin still in her hand. The engine started instantly, smooth as a vow kept. She settled behind the wheel, glanced once at the photograph on the dash, Rachel's grin framed by dust and sunlight. Her lips parted just enough for a whisper. "Tomorrow, Rage, I'll be there." The van rolled forward, tires whispering across the asphalt. The gate closed slowly behind her, but she didn't look back. The road ahead shimmered in the heat, the horizon wide and waiting. And for the first time in a long time, she felt something that almost scared her. Hoping. The road stretched on forever. North Carolina fell behind her in waves of heat and pine, and the world narrowed to the sound of tires humming against asphalt. The van's engine purred softly now, freshly tuned, faithful again. Helen drove with one elbow out the window, the wind tugging at her sleeve, sunlight glinting off the compass on the dash. Every few miles she'd glance at the folded map beside her, a small, hand-drawn lifeline marked in red ink. Each circle was a name, a story, a place most people would pass without knowing. But she knew. Each one meant someone who hadn't made it back. She touched the coin in her pocket like it might anchor her to the present. For honor, for silence. The words pressed into her skin. The radio crackled now and then, static old country music, a weather alert that faded before she could catch it. Mostly she preferred the quiet. The hum of the tires was enough. It reminded her of helicopter rotors far away, steady, predictable, alive. Somewhere near the state line, she stopped at a roadside diner. The kind of place with peeling paint, a jukebox that hadn't worked since, and a waitress who'd seen everything. Helen sat at the counter, ordered coffee black. The waitress poured it, studied her grease-streaked hands, the cap pulled low. "Truck trouble." "Something like that," Helen said. The woman nodded. "Always something on this stretch. You headed west." Helen hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Yeah, west." The coffee was hot, bitter, perfect. For a few minutes she let herself breathe, surrounded by the soft clatter of plates, the hum of an air conditioner that barely worked, the faint smell of fried batter and thyme. On the wall above the counter, a faded newspaper clipping was framed in cheap glass. "Local soldier honored posthumously." Beneath the headline, a young woman's face, not Rachel, but the same quiet strength. Different war, same eyes. Helen stared at it longer than she meant to. The waitress followed her gaze. "Her name was Beckett. Iraq '07, she said. Her mom comes by every year, still sets a coffee out for her." Helen's throat tightened. "She still drive that route?" The waitress looked surprised. "Yeah, you knew her." Helen's fingers brushed the coin in her pocket. "We knew the same sky," she said softly. Then she finished her coffee, left cash on the counter, and walked back out to the heat. The van started smooth, steady as a heartbeat. As the diner faded in the mirror, Helen caught herself whispering, "Keep going." It was something Rachel used to say when the mission got bad. "Keep going, Helen. Doesn't matter how, just forward." By dusk, the horizon burned orange. She passed small towns that looked half asleep, rusted gas stations, mailboxes leaning like tired shoulders, fields where time forgot to move. Every so often she'd pull over, unfold the map, check another red circle. One stop was a veteran's just outside. A single flag out front, faded but proud. Inside, a handful of old Marines played cards in the corner, country music soft on the radio. When she walked in, conversation paused, not because they recognized her, but because they recognized something in her. The posture, the quiet, the weight. A man with a prosthetic arm nodded once. "Coffee's free if you don't talk about politics." Helen smiled faintly. "Deal." She sat, sipped, listened. They didn't ask where she'd served, and she didn't offer. Among veterans, silence was its own language. On the wall above the counter hung a board with handwritten names under the words "Carry it forward." Next to each name, a pin marked a route, a place, a date. Helen reached into her pocket and pressed the coin against the wood. The edge gleamed where light caught the initials RD. "Mind if I add one?" she asked the owner. He handed her a marker without question. She wrote in block letters, "Rachel Dawson, still on the road," then placed a pin on the Knoxville line. The owner read the name, nodded slowly. "She with you?" Helen's answer was quiet, "Always." When she left, one of the old Marines saluted without standing. She returned it with 2 fingers to her temple, then heart, the same gesture from the gate. Night settled heavy as she drove on. The stars came out one by one, shy at first, then bold. The air through the cracked window was cool, carrying the faint smell of pine and distant rain. Her thoughts drifted, unwillingly, to the night Rachel died. Not the gunfire, not the smoke, those details had worn smooth over time. What stayed sharp were the small things. The tremor in Rachel's hand as she passed the last magazine, the way she'd smiled when the bird lifted off, the sound of her voice through static, "You owe me a road trip." Helen gripped the wheel. "I'm still driving," she whispered. By the time dawn broke, mist clung to the low valleys. The highway unwound like ribbon through silver fog. She pulled into a rest stop, stretching sore muscles, the cool air biting through her shirt. A vending machine hummed softly beside a row of benches. She sat for a while, coin in hand. The engraving caught the weak sunlight, "For honor, for silence." On the back, "Carry it forward." Her thumb traced the letters RD, burned into the rim. "Yeah, I know," she murmured, still going. When she got back behind the wheel, the radio flickered again, this time catching a local station. The announcer's voice was calm, almost sleepy. "Tomorrow evening, Knoxville will host a correction ceremony at Veterans Overlook. Names newly inscribed will be unveiled at 1700 hours." Helen froze, her gaze snapped to the map on the seat. The final circle, Knoxville, Veterans Overlook, 1700. Her heart knocked once hard. She turned the volume down but didn't shut it off. The words hung in the air, "correction ceremony." If it was Rachel's name. The thought was a knife and a prayer all at once. She drove on, more careful now. The miles rolled beneath her, a quiet countdown. By midday, traffic thickened. Civilization crept back in, billboards, exit signs, people with somewhere to be. Helen's hands never left the wheel, but her mind kept replaying every mile since the desert, every face, every silence. At a stoplight, she caught her reflection in the side mirror. Older, weathered, but the eyes, they hadn't changed. They still watched the world like it might disappear. When she reached the city outskirts, she parked on a quiet side street and killed the engine. The silence inside the van felt alive. She sat there for a long minute, just breathing. The photo on the dash caught a shaft of afternoon light. Rachel's grin stared back at her, as bright as ever. Helen reached out, brushed a thumb across the corner of the image. "We made it," she said softly. The words trembled, but she didn't hide it. Outside, the sound of preparation drifted faintly through the air, the scrape of folding chairs, murmurs of volunteers, the metallic click of a microphone being tested. She could smell cut grass, hear the low hum of summer heat. She stepped out of the van. The world was blindingly bright, everything washed in sunlight that felt too kind for what the day would bring. She followed a narrow path uphill, her boots pressing into soft earth. Ahead, rows of white chairs faced a stone overlook. Beyond it, the Tennessee hills rolled out in every direction, green and endless. A section of the memorial wall was covered by cloth, the part yet to be revealed. The volunteers moved carefully, smoothing the fabric, setting flowers, aligning flags. Helen stayed back, hands in her pockets, the coin clenched tight in her palm. Her heart beat steady but heavy. Every step closer made it harder to breathe. She found a spot near the fence line, close enough to see, far enough to stay invisible. A few people glanced at her but didn't linger. To them, she was just another face paying respects. That was fine. She'd spent years living between notice and memory. An older man took the microphone, a local official, nervous, adjusting his notes. His voice carried unevenly through the speakers. Today, we honor those whose names were lost to error, to time, or to silence. Today, we correct what should never have been forgotten. Helen's fingers closed around the coin. The cloth rippled in the breeze. The volunteer at the edge reached up, peeled the tape slowly. The sound was soft, a whisper, a heartbeat. And then the name appeared. Rachel Dawson. No longer misspelled, no longer missing. Helen's vision blurred. The crowd bowed their heads in silence, the breeze lifting their hair, carrying the scent of pine. No applause, no speeches, just reverence. She didn't move closer. She didn't need to. Her job was done the moment the letters cut into the stone. She pressed the coin against her chest, just over her heart. For a long moment she stayed that way, a soldier without rank, without fanfare, standing at the edge of everything she'd carried. And somewhere inside her, beneath the ache and the years, a quiet voice rose, steady, teasing, familiar. "Keep driving, Helen." She smiled through the tears. "Yeah, rage," she whispered. "I'm not done yet." The crowd began to thin. One by one, the folding chairs creaked and collapsed. Hands shook softly. The murmur of small talk returned, cautious, subdued. The volunteers moved like caretakers of memory, folding flags, gathering programs. The sun dropped lower, the sky turning the color of brass. Helen stayed where she was, apart, quiet, the breeze tugging at her sleeve. She didn't follow the others down the hill. She couldn't. Not yet. She stood at the fence line, eyes locked on the new engraving. Rachel Dawson. The letters gleamed faintly in the fading light, sharp and clean against the weathered stone. It looked permanent. It looked right. The coin pressed into her palm until it hurt. That small, round piece of metal had weight not from silver but from everything it represented. Silence, sacrifice, a promise kept. She raised her hand to her heart, not as a salute, not as ritual, just a quiet gesture of belonging, of love too big for words. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and cut grass, and the faint trace of engine oil still clinging to her jacket. Somewhere a bird called sharp and high, as if marking the moment. In her mind she heard Rachel again. Not memory, not imagination, presence. "Keep going, Helen, you've still got miles." She smiled through the ache. "Yeah," she whispered, "I hear you." Tears slid down her cheeks, slow, deliberate, like they'd been waiting years for permission. She didn't wipe them away. Some things were meant to be seen, even if no one else was looking. When she finally turned back toward the road, the sun had dipped below the ridge. Shadows stretched long across the grass. The van waited where she'd left it, sunlight flashing off its windshield like a signal. Her steps were steady. Every one of them felt like release. By the time she reached the driver's side door, the world had gone gold, the kind of light that makes even scars look sacred. She slid into the seat, the familiar scent of grease, dust, and sun-warmed vinyl wrapping around her like home. On the passenger seat, the folded map fluttered in the breeze from the open window. The red circles marked her route like blood drops across a country that had forgotten half its heroes. She looked at the photo on the dash. Rachel's grin was still there, fearless as ever, eyes bright beneath that old helmet. Helen tapped the picture twice with 2 fingers, temple, heart. A small ritual, hers alone. "Name carved now," she said softly. "You can rest." The van started on the first try. The engine's hum rolled through the quiet like a heartbeat. She shifted into gear and pulled onto the road. Gravel popped under the tires as the overlook fell behind. The highway opened ahead, stretching endless through the Tennessee hills. The radio hissed once, then found a signal, a local station playing an old track, something about highways and second chances. She left it on. It fit. For a while she didn't think, didn't plan, just drove. The wind poured through the window, cold against her tear-damp face. The steering wheel felt warm under her hands like it recognized her grip. Each mile marker whispered of something she'd carried: names, faces, silences. And yet, for the first time in years, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like purpose. Somewhere near the state border, she pulled into a rest stop overlooking a valley. The air had cooled, the sky deepening to violet. She killed the engine and sat in the hush that followed, that pure, weightless silence only found after doing something right. She reached for the coin, turned it over in her palm. The metal caught the last glint of sunlight. For honor, for silence, carry it forward. Her thumb brushed the initials again, RD. "You still owe me that road trip," she murmured, "but I think I've been driving it for both of us." The wind moved softly through the trees below. For a heartbeat, it almost sounded like laughter, not from the world outside, but from the one she carried inside. She smiled, tired and genuine. A truck rumbled past on the highway behind her, its headlights washing the van in brief white light before fading back into the distance. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of memories, of peace, of something larger than both. She leaned back in her seat, eyes half closed, letting the sound of the wind fill the space. Her life had become one long, unbroken road, no fixed destination, no final rest, just the simple act of motion, the doing, the carrying. That was enough. Because somewhere out there, another soldier was breaking down by another fence, waiting for someone to see past the surface. And maybe one day, someone like her would pull over, pop the hood and fix what they could. Maybe that was the legacy, not medals or names on stone, but the way people remembered to stop, to help, to carry forward what silence can't erase. The sky deepened to indigo. The first stars pricked through the clouds like small, stubborn lights. Helen started the van again, letting the headlights carve a pale tunnel through the dark. The highway west opened wide. The compass on the dash pointed steady as ever. North wasn't where she was going, forward was. Her hand rested over her heart, feeling the shape of the coin through her jacket. Warm metal, solid truth. She thought about Rachel, the grin, the voice, the defiance that refused to die even when everything else had. If dignity has a sound, she thought, it's the sound of someone who keeps driving. The van rolled on, steady, headlights cutting through the mist. Each mile was quieter, lighter, easier. At a crossroads, she slowed for a red light. A pickup pulled up beside her, windows down, music spilling out, a song she hadn't heard in years, one Rachel used to hum over the radio static overseas. Helen turned her head, listening. The driver, a young woman, uniform folded neatly on the seat beside her, nodded once in greeting before the light changed. Helen nodded back. Small connection, instant recognition, the unspoken kind that exists only between those who walked through the same fire. When the light turned green, they both pulled forward, one toward home, one toward the horizon. The coin glinted faintly under the dash light. She smiled. "Carry it forward," she whispered. And maybe somewhere, on another base, in another story, that phrase would pass from one soldier to another, quiet as prayer, strong as memory. The van climbed a long hill, headlights stretching far ahead. At the crest, she glanced in the mirror, the overlook far behind now, just a dark line against the ridge. The stars spread wider, the night deeper, the road endless. She reached over, turned down the radio, and let the silence take its place. The kind of silence that doesn't ache anymore. The kind that fills instead of empties. Her last words that night were barely audible over the engine's hum. "I'm still going, Rage, for both of us." The van moved steady into the dark, taillights glowing like embers fading into the distance. Wind roared through the open window, carrying the faint laughter of someone long gone. And as the night swallowed the road, her story, their story, became one more whisper in the endless hum of the highway. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak.